Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be reviewing the new Black Sabbath box set, Anno Domini, and examining the remasters of Headless Cross, Tyr, and Cross Purposes, as well as sharing my thoughts on the new remix of Forbidden. Full disclosure, my box set has not arrived yet in the mail, but Anno Domini dropped at midnight on streaming services, so I've been able to hear them on Spotify already, which I think for the sake of this video is a good thing, because I'm mainly going to be talking about the sound of the four albums and the differences between the originals and the new remasters, and in the case of Forbidden, the new remix. And so I think that, listening on Spotify gave me the opportunity to hear them with a good pair of headphones. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through the four albums here, talking about the sound, so let's get started. We start things off here with Headless Cross, in my opinion, the best Tony Martin era album, and it's definitely been in need of a remaster for a long time. Compare this to, the original, it sounds much better, right? The sound is clean, it's powerful. Tony Martin sounds awesome, so it's definitely an upgrade for sure. And I always thought that this album was very underrated, and if Ronnie James Dio was on lead vocals for any of these tracks, this would be considered a classic Sabbath album. But because it's Tony Martin, and that was the era that was less popular, it gets overlooked, so it's remained a bit underrated over the years. So I'm really glad that it's finally getting attention here from the band, and finally a proper remaster. So the same can be said really for the other three albums as well, although I'm not a big fan of Forbidden, but I am glad that the entire era here is getting more attention. Next, we have Tyr from 1990, and the original mix for Tyr, I think, is fine, and out of the bunch, I'd say it's probably the one that needed a remaster the least. So there's definitely some improvement here on the new one from Anno Domini. Things sound a little crisper, but ultimately it's very similar to the original, so pretty much the same album from a sonic perspective, aside from a few alterations. But just in general, I think it definitely didn't need the remaster as much as some of these other albums, and so the Tyr remaster is fine, but I still prefer the OG mix. Similar to Tyr, I don't mind the original mix of Cross Purposes from 1994, but I think the new remaster definitely does improve upon some areas sonically. For example, the record sounds, much clearer in certain spots. The CD version of Anno Domini has the bonus track What's the Use, but it's not on the vinyl version. For me, I ordered the CD set, so that's kind of cool. I'm excited to have that as part of, this box set, and have that as part of Cross Purposes. That was, I believe, only released on the Japanese version of Cross Purposes previously, so I think it's great that it's finally getting to be heard by a wider audience. It's a great deep cut there. And as for the corresponding live album that followed, Cross Purposes Live, I was surprised that it wasn't included on this box set, but hopefully we'll get a reissue of that in the future as well. And last but not least, we have Forbidden. This was the album I was most looking forward to hearing on Anno Domini. It's a brand new mix of the record from 1995 here, and I think it's important first to talk about the state of the original album, which I can't stand it. It's one of my least favorite Black Sabbath albums, and a lot of that does have to do with the sound. So I was really looking forward to hearing the new mix of this record here, and seeing if hopefully Tony Iommi and company could salvage this record, which was just a production dumpster fire at first. So the difference between the remix and the original is night and day, in my opinion. So to put it mildly, it's a massive improvement as far as I'm concerned. And throughout the record, I noticed, the addition of new or reworked guitar parts, which is really cool. Almost echoed vocals and amplified vocals by Tony Martin, especially on tracks like Shaking Off the Chains and I Will Cry for You. Enhanced drums by Cozy Powell, varying degrees as well of different tones from track to track compared to the original. So I think this version of Forbidden is, far superior. It sounds heavier, it's more in your face, and just clearer overall. So, to answer the question of whether or not Forbidden has been fixed, I definitely think so from a sonic perspective. I'm not a fan of this album. I think the material here represents the band hitting rock bottom. Really nothing very interesting, in my opinion, on this record, but, from a sonic perspective, like I said, a definite improvement here, a massive improvement in the sound for sure, and that was really what I was interested in hearing from Anno Domini more than anything else, was how they would try to fix Forbidden, and I think they definitely did restore it, or at least not restore it. The original was terrible, but I think they're able to repair it. I think it's a better word from a production standpoint, and so for that, I'm glad. It's also the only one out of the four included here in this box set that I don't currently own the OG mixes of, and so definitely excited when my copy of Anno Domini comes to finally have a copy of Forbidden to add to my collection. Even though I don't love Forbidden, the completist in me is very happy that my copy is on the way, and it'll have an updated sound to boot. So when my copy of Anno Domini arrives, I'll be happy to put Forbidden in my collection, even though, again, not one of my favorite Sabbath records, but I do think that this was a vast improvement in terms of sound quality, and so for that, yeah, it has been fixed, and it has been, repaired beyond, what the original was and how poor that production was. Ranking the 4 albums in terms of sound quality following the new remasters and in the case of Forbidden, an all-new mix, I have to go with Forbidden at number 1. Just a big turnaround from a production standpoint here, and definitely the most noticeable and the most needed for sure. At number 2, let's go with Headless Cross. It's an album that needed a remaster for a long time, so I'm glad that it finally gets one here. Number 3, Cross Purposes, definitely clearer than the original. And at number 4, Tyr, one album that I didn't think needed much of an overhaul in the first place. Ultimately, I definitely recommend the new Black Sabbath box set, Anno Domini, and checking out the remasters, as well as the new mix of Forbidden. It's about time the Tony Martin era finally got the respect it deserves and the attention it deserves from the band. He really did a solid job with the band and got them to the 90s when Sabbath's interest level was at an all-time low. So, some albums are definitely better than others, but he's a really talented vocalist, and he's proven to be the right man for the job over time. I think those albums have aged pretty well. And with these new remasters, now they finally sound proper. I'm also glad these are now available on streaming services, finally, right? And, the box set comes at a great deal. The CD version, I know, is about $60, which is a great deal for 4 previously hard-to-find records with a new revamped sound. And just for Tony Martin, I'm glad that he's finally getting a little bit of a resurgence here. He released Thorns in 2022, which was great, and now finally getting, that box set of the Martin era, which is, something that I think a lot of Sabbath fans have been wanting for a long time, and I know Tony Martin was talking about it for a really long time before they finally went ahead with it and released it. So I'm glad that it's finally here, and hopefully this sheds more light on the Tony Martin era, and there's some really underrated stuff there, so hopefully more people discover it as a result, because there's really good stuff all around. Again, I'm not a big fan of Forbidden, but those other albums, all really decent Sabbath albums that nobody ever seems to talk about. And again, what I said at the beginning of the video with Headless Cross, that's one of those albums that I think if you had Dio on lead vocals, it would be considered this all-time great Sabbath album. But because there was less of a spotlight on Sabbath with Tony Iommi fronting the band, it gets, wildly underrated. And so that goes for a lot of those records. And I do feel like now with, them being available on streaming services and with this box set finally getting released, finally now the Tony Martin era gets attention, and the attention that it's so rightfully deserved for so long. So that wraps up my thoughts on the new remasters and the new mix of Forbidden. So I really wanted to share my thoughts on all 4 here as part of the Anno Domini box set, which I've heard on streaming services. I listened to it on Spotify on a good pair of headphones just to get a good feel of the sound. My copy of the box set is coming today, but mainly what I wanted to talk about here was the sound and how it differs from the OG mixes, and so that's really what I wanted to talk about here. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section below, what are your thoughts on the new sound for those 4 albums? Do you think it's an improvement? And what are your thoughts on the remix of Forbidden? Did Black Sabbath fix Forbidden with this Anno Domini box set with the new mix? I definitely want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.